Right, hi everyone. We'll just let a few people, only got another minute to go, so we'll just let people come in. Welcome to this webinar. Really looking forward to having a great conversation with Dr. Jason, and I'm sure as normal he will be just as provocative and challenging. And yeah, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. It should be open to everyone. I always make this mistake about, but as far as I can see, everyone can see everyone else's comments. So there we go. Jason's put one in, and excellent, Adrian. Thank you. So just add your comment, add your questions in there. I'll keep an eye on that. So it's 12 o'clock. We will make a start. So yeah, thanks. And basically, we call this the new essentials of strategy. Staying relevant in a changing world. So at Govern 365, we work with boards and leadership teams across New Zealand and beyond to help them better understand their governance maturity and, more importantly, their blind spots. And one of the most common blind spots we come across is strategy. So we help boards step back, regain perspective, and focus improvement where it matters most. So providing structures, insight, practical prioritisation, and a clear pathway forward. So that's really why today's conversation is so important. Strategy has increasingly jumped up over time, and I'll use Dr. Jason's word there, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Instead of providing clarity, many strategies confuse. If you're on the end of a strategy, sometimes you're not clear what it means. So instead of guiding decisions, they sit on shelves. Instead of helping organisations stay relevant, they become static in a dynamic world. Yet strategy doesn't have to be complicated and shouldn't be. So in this session, we're going back to essentials, not basics, essentials. So what good strategy looks like, how to recognise when it's missing, and how boards and leadership teams can simplify without oversimplifying. That's especially critical for small, medium-sized businesses where time, attention, and capability, and potentially capacity must be focused on really what truly moves the needle. So I'm really delighted again to join with Dr. Jason Fox. So, Jason, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so good to be back here with you.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant to have you. So, anyone who hasn't seen the first webinar, it was over a year ago, and that's on our website. So, you're welcome to view that. It's excellent. Game Changers, I think it was called. So Jason is one of Australasia's most respected thinkers and practitioners in strategy, leadership, and organisational performance. He's known for cutting through complexity, challenging outdated thinking, and helping leaders navigate uncertainty with clarity and confidence. He's worked with organisations across most sectors, from corporates, government, SMEs, not-for-profits, helping leaders rethink how strategy is formed, communicated, and lived. And what I really particularly value about Jason's work is his ability to bring strategy back to first principles, practical, human, relevant, and especially in an environment which is becoming so complicated and where simplicity is rare. So thanks for joining us, Jason. Really looking forward to it. And I'll kick off with one of the things you talked about. You talk about strategy being junked up. So I'm interested to understand what you mean by this, and how did strategy drift so far from its original purpose?
Yeah, when we think strategy these days, often the associated images are bloated PowerPoint slides, heavy documentation, complicated plans, numbers, spreadsheets. There's a whole heap of work around the notion of strategy. And I would say that this work is a compensation or a kind of cope for what is at the heart of this. How do we get there? We've seen an erosion of relationality. We don't have the same trust within teams and organizations that we once had, and we compensate for this by deploying more and more frameworks, more and more structures, and schemes. And this is a kind of a defensive posture too, because there isn't the relationality and trust. The folks developing the strategy kind of over-engineer it so that they can protect themselves from questions like, oh, why didn't we think of this, or what about this? And so as a result of the organizations not having the same kinship that they once had, we instead get the bloat and the junked up processes and documents and all the theater of strategy instead of actually having the conversations that matter.
Right. Excellent. So, in terms of when you walk into an organisation today, what are some common signs that you see um, that what they call a strategy isn't actually one?
I found well, that's interesting, right? Walking into an organization. So let's just pause. Like, allow me. It's very rare that I'm accused of being practical, right? So just allow me to dally on this little tangent, because so many organizations are virtual these days. Or what is even an organization? One lens I like to think of an organization is that it is like an egregore. An egregore is an entity that is formed via intersubjective belief. So all companies, all organizations are effectively egregores, these entities. And yeah, we might see their symbols, you might see the company logo, you might hear people reference, I work for Google, I work for Apple, I work for whomever. But the organization itself is relatively nebulous. You can't necessarily point to a building and say that's the organization. That's a building. The organization exists as a collective set of beliefs. But when I walk into a context where we're talking about the organization, the first sign of something that people call a strategy that isn't one would be, as I mentioned before, the bloated PowerPoint deck. I'd try to get a sense of, okay, what is the strategy right now? And they'll send me a PDF or worse, like a .ppt, or nowadays a .gppt, because the strategy is just spurned out by some hallucinating large language model. And you'll get all these slides. And the second sign that we have a strategy that's not really a strategy is you'll see undifferentiated or safe language. These are the predictable indicators like when you see company value statements of integrity and respect and trust and so on. With strategy, if I'm seeing undifferentiated language, like if I'm thinking, hang on, this could be any company's strategy, then that's usually a bad sign. And the third sign is when I see boxes, like literal rectangular boxes, pillars, or language of roadmaps and blueprints and other hard metaphors, that gets me concerned too, because it usually indicates to me that a strategy has been architected in isolation from the mess of the realities of the complexity of life. And so you have this beautiful, polished, neat, linear, easy to measure, concrete plan that looks great on paper, but will probably quickly become irrelevant as the world changes around it.
Hmm. So, if that's what bad looks like, or maybe that's what a lot looks like of when you go into, if you strip it back to the fundamentals, what would walking in or viewing in an organization where you see, yeah, they're on the right track. They've got a few of the right fundamentals in place.
Yeah, and this whole thing is going to make a lot of folks pretty uncomfortable if we're talking about. I loved your point before about it's the essentials, not the basics.
Mhm.
That there is something essential to strategy, but it's not simple. Oh, sorry, it's not simplistic. It's not basic. It's not easy necessarily. But the signs that I'd look for is much more qualitative. I would talk with executives, and they're already in a relational, warm, and attuned sense. They're talking about orientating towards relevance realization. So immediately, the conversation is we've done well, we've established ourselves in these markets and so on, but we can see that there are some big changes coming with agentic AI, with the shift in government policy and da da da. And so where we're focused in at the moment is changing our positioning and orientation so that we're relevant in these sectors. And that means we have to transition from this business unit that has been really good for us in the past and invest into this new thing, which we're having to learn as we go. And so curiosity, acuity, attunement to emerging patterns and needs. When I say acuity, I mean like attention to kind of what is changing at the periphery. And attunement is actually sensing into that. So it's not just a tidbit that you read about, but you've actually sensed into it. There's an understanding of your current business model. I've got a checklist here. This is a big answer. So the essentials of strategy would be understanding your existing business model. It's surprising how many executive teams don't understand the existing business model. And so when I do a strategic offsite with them as we're canvassing the business model, and here I reference two things. There's the business model canvas, which was developed by Strategizer, I think maybe 15 years ago or 12 years ago. And then there's the operating system canvas developed by the Ready and an author by the name of Aaron Dignan, who wrote a book called Brave New Work, which you can find for both of these versions, free copies of on the internet. Look up the business model canvas or the operating system canvas. And the operating system canvas is a set of 12 questions that look at different factors within your operating system. How authority is distributed, how incentives work, how innovation happens, how communication happens. So when you've got your business model and you've got your operating system, and then you start to realize, hang on, do we even know what's going on now today? Does this all make sense? Because very often there are things we're doing right now that already make no sense, let alone will make no sense whatsoever in the near future. And so once we've canvassed the business model and the operating system, we then want to start to sense into multiple future scenarios and then find where the common incoherencies lie. And so this will help us to understand where some parts of what we do, like certain customer segments we go after, or certain channels in which we reach our customers, or key partnerships that we have, or key resources that we use, or key activities that we do, or even key value propositions that we have, where they may be incoherent, where they just don't make sense. They're not actually relevant in these futures. And then on the flip side, as we do this activity, we can sense into domains where we have an almost unfair advantage in these domains when we look to it. And that's something worth considering too. And so with this understanding and this real heightened shared awareness of the business model and the operating system, we start to cultivate a quiver of options, strategic initiatives we might deploy in the future should the right conditions manifest. We also want to have the ability to provision for experimentation. So just because it's an option doesn't mean it's a viable alternative option to the default ways of doing things. And then we need to understand the gravitational pull to the default. I just mentioned default thinking. It is pervasive. Our defaults are the options we choose automatically in the absence of viable alternatives. They're safe, predictable, they have precedence, they're easy to measure. No one's going to get fired for simply doing the default. And the pathway to future irrelevance is littered with safe, prudent, reasonable decisions that bolster the defaults that have been established. So all of those components I would consider to be essentials. And then the final piece of this is you need a place for strategy to exist as a living conversation, an asynchronous channel where if you're reading an article or you'll see something and you think, hang on, I think we need to be paying attention to this, there's a place for that to live. That's not simply emails or a phone call.
Right. So someone just wanted the name of the book again. So
Brave New Work by Aaron Dignan.
I think I've got that on my shelf actually. But
I would be, it's very likely. And then the other one is Business Model. I think the book is Business Model Generation. But effectively, you can pilfer the canvases from both books and do quite well. For Aaron Dignan shared a Medium post quite a while ago. Thanks, Jerry. Yeah.
Okay. Right. So in terms of, so what you've said is attachment to what is changing. So sensing what is changing, having...
And well, not so much not attachment necessarily, but acuity and attunement.
Yeah, sorry,
yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So that is, and where should that come from in the organization? Should that be throughout the organization? So you've got all of your frontline, board, leadership, and everything in between.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of. There's this great book called Be More Pirate. Which looks at the philosophy of pirates and pirate ships, and the idea being that as your team grows, you want to be more pirate in that you don't want to simply build a bigger organization with a centralized point of intelligence and control. You want to distribute leadership and authority through the organization. So it's more like a fleet. You promote folks. Like if a pirate takes over another ship, they don't want to dismantle their ship and build a bigger ship because your ship would be too slow. It wouldn't be able to do well. You instead want to have a fleet, a network, an anti-fragile network of trusted accomplices in order to effectively do your work, to execute the strategy. And so the insight it really comes from everywhere in an ideal sense. If you've got folks that are frontline interfacing directly with customers and consistently hearing an issue that keeps coming up, we want to hear about that, right? Likewise, if you're an executive and you have the privilege of flying to attend conferences and you're seeing something that another company in a different country is doing that isn't happening in your region, you want also a place for that to live too. So the idea here is you want your organization to be cultivating in-house intelligence. Many organizations are so swept up doing the work that when it comes to strategy development, they outsource their thinking these days to a large language model or to an expensive consulting firm. And they get this lovely package thinking that is reasonable and makes sense, but it's not strategic differentiation. It's the default. It's what everyone else is doing. And that does not lead to a strategic advantage, and it doesn't lead to enduring relevance realization. You want to cultivate this capacity, capability, and disposition internally. And there's
Right.
another point here. Really, we really need to train ourselves to attend to the penumbra. The penumbra is the kind of the shadowy outer circle. So what happens at the moment is most people have an information diet that is largely informed via the mainstream media. So it's the main news networks, it's the main newspapers, this financial review, it's just the default place where everyone else is looking. But if you can actually start to be better at scouting out what is actually happening on the periphery, like I discovered a news site recently called Interval News, which showcases news stories that are actively being suppressed. And that's what gives you insight as to certain technology purchases that are happening around, say, AI facial recognition and so on. And these are good insights to inform and enrich strategic decision making depending on the domains that you play within. And so an intentional cultivation of non-mainstream or unexpected sources, and if you've got folks that are scouting out that and filtering and curating that for an internal cultivation of knowledge, then you're going to have such rich fodder for better strategic decision making.
I want to just come back to having the multiple future scenarios because you talked about understanding your existing business model and operating system, multiple scenarios, and the incoherences. So how do you spot incoherences? Because a lot of people have optimism bias that they don't see it as an incoherence. They think we can get there. We'll just carry on doing what we're doing. We'll get to that opportunity or
Yes.
that. So what are some of the capabilities or things that groups, and I'm thinking leadership teams and boards tend to be doing most of this thinking,
Mm.
whether that's right or wrong, and you'll challenge me on that, whether there should be other people involved in that. How do you get to those incoherencies?
I do. This is where I do feel like some sort of external input is useful. Whether it's like I know you facilitate groups with CEOs where you create containers where you can ask quite generative questions. And then the CEOs themselves are having to think about it, but in a context where there's other folks thinking about it. And there's a really generative context. Or when I come in to facilitate strategy or leadership offsites, and I'm able to ask the taboo questions, the questions that would never surface in the normal context. I mean, one of the favorite questions I love to ask is, what are we pretending to not know? And there's usually some uncomfortable, there's a subconscious, like, we know this is happening, but we don't want to face into it because it's existentially threatening, it's challenging, it's inconvenient. A lot of changes, particularly when we're in complex domains, deprivilege expertise, which is threatening for executives and leaders who have an identity around knowing stuff. There's an epistemological humility that is required when looking at the future and sensing into these incoherencies. There's a lot of we just don't know. But I would say that, you know, An example of an incoherency might be, say you're a business model and your business model. Sorry, say you have a business model and Instagram it is an example of one channel that you use to get a lot of work, or there's another particular channel. We need to start looking at the interaction of emerging phenomena. So at the moment, most social media channels are increasingly being inundated with AI slop. So this is content that is easily produced via large language models that is quicker to produce than it is to consume. And this is the same tragedy of the commons that we've experienced with emails. The average time in aggregate it takes to send emails is less than the time it takes to read emails. And so it just grows to the point where people want to avoid looking at their inbox or have all sorts of ways to ruthlessly scan and process through that. Plus, we're starting to get aware of all of the misinformation, disinformation, and the mental health hazards associated with social media. So all of that coming in mind would suggest that a business model that is reliant on that as a particular channel might want to start exploring what we call the adjacent possible. So it's not necessarily those channels themselves, but it's like, what else? What are some other ways that we might be able to reach our clients and customer bases? We see this also with some companies that had a reliance on Airbnb or similar large monopolized things, realizing that we're in the enshittification phase now. And so the profit margins are getting squeezed out. It's getting more difficult because they have a monopoly. How do we start branching out into some other domains? And so these incoherencies, as awkward as they are to face into, they need to be faced into. There's a mythological lens to this. I love the archetype of trickster. Trickster is not someone you want at the center. You don't want trickster leadership, but you do want to microdose chaos. You want to invite disruption in regularly in small doses and create an accord with change rather than deny it and have the criticality build up so much to the point that when change does happen, it completely breaks your business model. And so leaning into these incoherencies, if you have a niggling sense of doubt, if you're thinking about unintended consequences or second and third order effects of new innovations, like where things are going, this is my life right now with the material demand that artificial intelligence is forcing, whether it comes to RAM, whether it comes to like metals and chips and processors. A lot of business models are in an existential moment right now because the core components they need to build what they're selling are just not feasible in terms of their business model and their expenses. And so a lot is changing in our world right now, and we need to front into these potential incoherencies early and get on the front foot with them. Otherwise, they'll trip us up.
So if you're a small business or a not-for-profit, and you can't afford to bring you in to run a 2 or 3 day session, what are the essential things they need to be doing above anything else? And I'm not talking about a 1 or 2 day offsite or whatever. What's the things they can be doing that will build towards a useful strategy for them and their organization?
Well, it's not a singular offsite, and strategy isn't developed in offsites. But offsites, I still think, are an important element of the mix. There are some conversations that are just too complex to be had in normal meeting formats, and it actually makes sense to be removed from your context in order to have these conversations. One of the things that sometimes folks do they'll use Lego in facilitation simply so that you can get some removes, so you can talk about the system that you've built and you've actually got some distance. And accessing meta-systemic thinking and meta-rational thinking is the domain that we want to be in. You can't be within the system. But the main thing that a small business or an SME really needs to do is to cultivate and provision for qualitative sense making. And that means this goes against the relentless drive towards efficiency and optimization that we have been in pursuit of for the last couple of decades. What this means is we need to cultivate time to hang, time to literally sense into what are we noticing, what are we seeing, what's on our minds, what have we read recently, and we don't want to make this too formal a process, and at the same time, we don't want to make it too lackadaisy. Um, I'm fortunate. I was so resistant to this. I don't know why, but I'm fortunate to be part of what we call a men's triangle. It's meant to be a men's group, but there's only three of us, and it's a couple of friends. But we catch up once a month and go for a walk along the river. And the context is very intentional. It's like a hangout, but there is enough structure that we're sensing into how we're going, what's on our minds, what's going on, and that's the thing that we want to provision for. You're a small business or you're an SME. You don't have the ridiculous, heavy, almost undead like burden of a large or multinational organization. You are there's vitality. Don't try to emulate what the big corps are doing. You have something special here. So it won't take much, but it's provisioning time to hang in an intentional yet not overly structured way so that we can sense into what we're noticing, what we're seeing, what we're thinking, what we're anticipating.
Right. Okay. So really, just having some conversations that you don't normally have. That if it's in a boardroom, whatever you, let's.
Well, yes, and I think that there's still something about the asynchronous hub for these things to live, and this rubs the wrong way for a lot of folks because they're like, last thing I want is another Microsoft Teams thing or another thing. It's like, oh, it's too many channels. Even if it's a WhatsApp or ideally like a corporate surveilled thing, so like a Signal chat or something like that. That's a conversation where there's an exchange of links and things like that. That coupled with some sort of ritualized gathering where this is put into the spotlight. So an offsite, yeah, sure, do that once a year. I would still believe in having quarterly summits. So 3 quarterly summits and 1 offsite makes sense to me. I would still believe in, like a weekly check-in or something like that. Maybe it's monthly, depending on your context. But there are ways that we sense into this conversation, and then there are formal kind of like, all right, let's check in. Is this strategy still on track? Do we need to update our documentation? And when I say
Right.
documentation, I mean that in a light sense.
Yeah. So you've got the rituals in terms of making sure that you've got constant sensing, constant what's going on, what's changing, and then maybe once or twice a year, or whether it's quarterly or annual, you're getting some different questions come in to provoke different thinking.
Yeah, well, when I work with large organizations, there's usually a core strategic innovation team that is bolstered by rotating secondment, and they're maintaining a quiver of options, a portfolio of strategic initiatives. For a small to medium organization or smaller, you guys can just do this yourselves. But I do think there needs to be a place for some of these things to live, including a sense around options that you are considering to beginning experimenting with. And once you've got enough sense of the options and you have enough sense of like, yeah, this, I think we should start moving on this. You don't leap all in with it. You start experimenting, and that experimentation yields insight, which can be integrated into your strategic decision making.
Yep. Okay. We've got a question here. I don't quite understand it, but Mary, you might be able to explain it. That repository of all sorts, does anyone read it or do anything with it? And what do you actually do with it?
The repository of what?
All sorts.
I'm not sure what that is.
Okay. You might be able to, Mary, you might be able to explain that a little bit more. I'm not
I think
really sure.
there's a brand of hard lollies called All Sorts or something like that. So it might be a reference to, I don't know, sorry.
Okay. So in terms of developing strategy, who should be involved? Because it typically tends to be the board and maybe the executive team that will have once a year an offsite. What would ideal look like? And is it a rolling maul in terms of strategy not being, you have the once a year, but should it be evolving throughout the year and changing as things change and as you get new information? What's good look like?
Uh, okay. So there's always variance. Like there's no one size fits all. So take what I'm about to say with a pinch of salt. This is heuristic. There's a deeper, herein lies the rub in this question. Ultimately, you want to have folks that have skin in the game. They have something at stake. So they care about the strategy. This is a distinction from what I would consider to be employee mindset, where, for example, something that's quite common at the moment is a resistance to learn and use and experiment with artificial intelligence. As a citizen and as someone who is, a living being on this one planet that we share, I'm deeply concerned from an existential sense around where things are going and how power works there. But from a pragmatic sense, everyone ought to be learning and understanding what is changing here because we're in a paradigmatic shift right now. An employee, like I was chatting with a friend yesterday, 2 days ago, who was saying that his engineers haven't even begun to use the licenses that they have for Claude Code or whatever they had. And apparently the engineer said, why would I use something that's going to replace me? And so you don't want that employee energy in strategic decision making. But at the same time, these are folks often who are interfacing directly with customers and clients. And so there's a challenge here. How incentives work. This is the awkward domain that many people don't want to discuss. This is the taboo. And, my orientation is much more like win and help others win. How can we create company contexts where if you're doing well, everyone's doing well and everyone feels a part of this, which comes back to the sense of relationality and trust, and also to your understanding of how incentives work. If you have more, how do we say, a form of corporate capture and extractive profit orientation, then it's going to be tricky to imagine how an employee would want to or be able to contribute effectively to your strategic decision making. So there's something there. What I'm saying here is in an ideal world, you have people in the room who have skin in the game, and ideally you have enough diversity that you're getting perspectives from the front line, but you really there is a savviness that is required. So strategy requires, as I mentioned before, metasystemic and meta-rational reasoning. You need to not be trapped within the system that you're trying to improve. You need to be able to see. You need to be able to take a perspective that is above the system and be able to compare and contrast your current system with other systems to see what might actually serve better. This is a developmental quality that is born of diverse experience, weathering entropy. Before we spoke today, just before the call started, you're talking about something you do with your group that has people reflecting on the highs and lows in life. And in these development is a quality of entropy and support. So when we've experienced extreme entropy, when we've moved country, I sometimes talk about if you've experienced disaster, divorce, displacement, or a death of someone close to you or something like that, all these things change your perspective. And so ultimately you want people in your strategy that are both experienced but not calcified in their experience. They're not stubborn in their expertise. They know stuff, but they know enough to know that they don't know everything and that the game is also changing. So in a small team, this is probably all of you, but as you get larger and in an organization, I'd still be thinking this is a good deep conversation with, 5 plus or minus 2.
Yeah, and in terms of, because I had a webinar with a lady on diversity of thought, and she talks about people coming with angles around process, options, evidence, people, risk, outcomes. And a lot of boards tend to be focused on outcomes, options, so they go very quickly from where we're going to here's the solution. Do you look for people who can naturally challenge from different angles in the business? So they might not be the most senior person, but they can always bring a different angle.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a quality, or it's a set of qualities, or more aptly, it's a set of sensibilities. So sensibility is where you have skills, but you also have the wisdom to know when a particular skill is good to use and when not to use it. So, with this is important with facilitating strategy too. A lot of facilitators will have frameworks that they are wedded to, that they always deploy and use. But what we really need to know is what serves in what context, and how do we choose. And so it's one thing to be able to ask challenging questions and challenge things. It's also another thing to be able to work and still cobble something together, even though it's not perfect. There's this trap that we can fall into where we seek agreement, 100% agreement, rather than just 100% alignment. And there is a wonderful term the poet John Keats came up with called negative capability, which is the ability to be effective amidst ambiguity and uncertainty without desperately reaching for certainty or clarity. How can do we have folks here that can move effectively, even if it's messy, even if we don't quite know where we're going? That's the quality that we're looking for.
Cool. We've got a couple of questions here. One is a really good one.
Sorry to the other one.
Questions are not really great, but this one's quite relevant to the process of strategy. Doesn't an organisation need to have a clear vision, mission, values, etc., before doing strategic planning? Is this a prerequisite?
No, not necessarily. There's a tendency that we all want to have everything lined up nicely. It does make sense. It's good. My issue, like I'm constantly messing things up because what we want, and Trickster abhors stagnation. Like if everything's too locked in and everything's too still, that's not good. And my worry sometimes is that organizations do a workshop, we come up with a clear vision, and then it gets laminated and it gets fixed. And then, okay, we've done that. Let's move on to the next thing. All of these things need to be living conversations. And so you don't need to. It is helpful. It does make sense in the sequence. Like, again, who are we? What do we stand for? Who do we serve? What is the value that we bring in this world? What is the role that we want to play? And then how do we actually profit from this as well? And profit is not a bad thing. You want to make money. You want to make good money because it means you're doing well. One of the best clients I worked with last year, I love this, is they just had this philosophy. It's like, yeah, we ruthlessly pursue profits, but then we reinvest the profits back into the work that we do to do better at what we do, which helps us to then do more of what we do. It's this generative cycle that we want. But the clarity of the vision and so forth, I mean, let's just not obsess about perfect clarity. There's no neatness, there's no perfection in clarity, but there is a shared sense like these are the stories we tell. This is the cloud of meaningness that we stand for. And each person has a variation on that. But if you take a step back, like if I use one of my favorite words, nebulosity. Nebulosity refers to cloud-like structures. If you're seeing a cloud, like you can't actually grasp it, you can't actually see the cloud, but take a step back and get perspective, you can see, oh, yeah, there's a shape here. This is what we stand for. This is what we collectively do. And there's an inherent anti-fragility and adaptability to that disposition.
Okay, all right, that's good. And one that links to research, and this might link into the experimentation. Where does research fit into strategy, particularly making sure it's evidence-based rather than anecdotal? And is there anything wrong with anecdotal?
Good question. So realistically, evidence-based research has incredible lag. And that's one of the, if you're talking medical interventions, human medical interventions, you want evidence-based. You want there to be rigorous procedures in place so you're going to minimize harm. Realistically, think about like what it takes to actually accrue enough evidence. You need scientists to conduct longitudinal studies. You need a sample size that is large enough and diverse enough in order to have statistical relevance. When that is published, the methodology needs to be sound. It then needs to be put into journals. Other scientists need to scrutinize that. You need to have replication of the studies in order to produce enough evidence. You need ultimately a meta-analysis of the studies of various studies in order to kind of form the evidence. You also need to be critical about who is incentivizing the research being done. All of that takes 9 years maybe for some things. So if you're relying on evidence-based for something like the experimentation with agentic artificial intelligence, you're going to be out of the game. I find it better to have a science-based approach, which doesn't valorize evidence, but puts it back into the context of um, observation, experimentation, and hypothesis observation experimentation, which means it's like we're asking the questions, we're conducting our research, we're testing against our own hypotheses. When you're a scientist, you're trying to disprove your hypothesis. Do we have enough evidence to disprove this? No, not yet. Okay, there's some evidence that suggests that that's not quite true, but was that an issue with our methodology? And I wouldn't discount anecdotal. I wouldn't discount intuition. This sounds heretical in this day and age, but intuition is non-conceptual knowing. If you have enough time immersed in a particular industry, in a particular market, interfacing with clients, you might be able to sense into things or have inklings or hunches that you can't quite put words to yet, but are worth exploring because you might be at the frontier of something into this. And so, I often say a lot of people wait for clarity, others lead. And the quality we need in this time, particularly in this chaotic era that we're in, which is not a stable era, we're in a phase shift civilizationally on this planet, technologically. We need to have folks that have their wits about them, which means that they've got acuity, they've got the ability to synthesize disparate pieces of knowledge into something that is timely, relevant, and apt. And they're attuned to the hunches and the inklings they have, and they have enough trust within the organization that they can share these inklings, pattern match that where others might be sensing into this too, and then conduct gentle experiments to see and to validate these hunches. They might not be scientific evidence, but it's evidence enough to inform and enrich your strategic decision making.
Right. As a nice provocative question here, what have you changed your mind on when it comes to strategy?
That's a good question. When I wrote the book How to Lead a Quest, which came out about 10 years ago, the whole thesis was orientation towards relevance realization. I was like, if you recognize unmet need and orientate towards that, if you sense into emerging need into the future, and if you orientate towards genuine value, you will stay relevant in the future, your business model will work. That is true. But what I didn't integrate enough was the power of bullshit. There are so many business models out there making so much money by perpetuating things that just, it's not that they're not lying, they're just indifferent to the truth. And a lot of business models make a lot of money based upon people's belief that things will make a lot of money. And so there's this whole thing here that I genuinely didn't consider because perhaps I was a little bit too idealistic and naive back then around, wow, there's actually, when it comes to narrative, sentiment, collective psychosis and momentum, like there are commercial opportunities within this that are worth paying attention to, even if you decide that that's not the path that you want to play based upon, the quality of your own character and so on. It's also a chance that we're in a situation right now that is known as a multipolar trap. The rivalrous dynamics sometimes force us to play in domains that we wouldn't want to, but we have to, because if we don't, our competitors will. And we also know that we're going to bring a certain integrity. But of course, everyone's thinking this. And so that leads to this omni-lose scenario where everyone's racing to the bottom. And I think an awareness of this dynamic is useful for the kind of strategic decision making we have. So I didn't factor that in enough. And I think that, courting or being aware of the fact that salience, as in what is noticeable, often outcompetes relevance because relevance takes a little bit more time to become realized. That's useful to bear in mind.
Okay, a couple of really quick questions, hopefully short answers, which will be,
hopefully.
For SME, would you say that a mentor coach is what is needed most to bounce ideas off?
Yes, but I would not necessarily singular all the time.
Yeah.
Trust your intuition, sense into
Different
this.
people.
Yeah, exactly.
Different people, different occasions. Okay. And brand strategy, is that aligned to this? Is the same principles in play for a brand strategy versus a company strategy?
Yeah. Broadly, yes. Brand strategy just needs to be there's a consistency, a coherence to the narrative that needs to be maintained, and so as things wend and change, you need to kind of adapt the story that's being told about this so it makes sense as to how you've gotten there.
Okay, brilliant. Um, and the other thing I was just going to quickly ask you around is for my shared context, is it really important, a shared and aligned context within the organization, within the board? Because some people can have a different context in the same room. So is that something that is really important to get everyone on the same page as to the viewpoint?
Yeah, I think this comes back to the very first point I opened up with. Like, it's the efforts done to enhance the relationality, warmth, kinship, and trust within your leadership team and within your wider culture itself. That is the precursor to having better strategic conversations. Like, if people are coming in, you've got a lovely homegrown business, and then you've got some recent executive banker that you've recruited who's bringing this big dick energy into your team. It's like it might be not quite like it doesn't quite match, but if there's been time to kind of like assimilate and to build genuine friendship, then by the time you're having the meeting, it's a different conversation.
Yeah, brilliant. All right, thank you. So what I've got out of this, so if I'm seeing a bloated PowerPoint, what bloated be more than 50 pages? So don't need to answer that. Safe language, I think, is the other thing. So if it's predictable, if it's incremental, if it makes logical sense, there's probably a red flag, I think, there I'm hearing. Boxes, pillars, roadmap, I've used all of those. Greek pillars always make sense. Architectural.
Strong.
Concrete plan, strong, yeah. Houses, the right fundamentals. So I think what I've heard is around orienting towards future relevance. So it's continually questioning relevance is a key thing that boards and executive teams need to do, and not assume relevance. And then probably ask the questions: how do we know? And continue to keep sensing that. Attunement to what's changing. So that again is looking at individuals, what they sense, where they're getting, and potentially getting news from alternative sources that are not mainstream. So you're seeing different angles, and potentially getting out there and talking to customers as well. So one of the things that I think a lot of boards don't do is they sit in the boardroom. They don't actually get involved in the organisation and go and look at weak signals that are coming through. I think the multiple future scenarios, the one that, so the other one is about understanding your existing business model and not assuming that we're all on the same page. So there's a couple of books you talked about there in terms of the business model canvas and the operating system canvas. And then multiple future scenarios, I think, and doing that experimentation. So, how do we test these? How do we have our quiver of options and continue to experiment? What else did I take out? What are we pretending not to know? That's a great question. I think that any of us can use in a situation to. So I think we talked about it before the start, but the value of questions and the value of different questions that change the context, change the conversation, I think is a really good one. Having that external perspective, so whoever that is, whether it's a friendly, but someone coming from a different point of view that will challenge you harder. So there is that value in the offsite. You've got to have conversations that may be uncomfortable and not predictable. But also you talked about having that flow from, whether it's 4 quarterlies, one of them being offsite, your monthly, your weekly. How does strategy become a living conversation and around relevance, around change, and sensing? I love the being attuned to your hunches and inklings. I think that's one I picked up on. So yeah, some fantastic ones. I've got to mention your newsletter. So Dr. Jason's got a newsletter, and you can sign up to it on foxwizard.com. So yeah, I've been signed up to it for a few years. It certainly will challenge you and get you thinking a little bit differently, which is great. So Jason, thank you. Really a powerful reminder that strategy doesn't need to be complex to be effective, just needs clarity, courage, and ongoing attention. At Govern 365, we see time and again when boards become clearer about insight into their strategy, maturity, where they sort of see some of their blind spots, their conversations improve and decisions sharpen and priorities become far more focused. So hopefully today's session has prompted you to reflect on your own strategy or raise some questions that you will raise with the board or the organisation. We'd certainly love to help. Jason would certainly love to help you as well if you're interested. And we if you'd like to strengthen your strategy conversations, please get in touch with me, and I can certainly get you in touch with Jason if you need to. We'd be delighted to have you at the next webinar. We've got another webinar coming up in a month's time that will be looking at AI and some of the pros and cons and issues that boards face. So thank you very much for joining us today. The webinar will be on our website in the next week. If there's any other questions you've got for us, please feed it through. But once again, Jason, thank you very much for your provocation and your musings with us. And we really look forward to seeing you again in the future.
Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone on the chat too. I can see your messages. Really appreciate it. It's nice to be here. Thank you.
Excellent. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.
Thanks.
See ya.